This week, Representative James Clyburn, Democrat of South Carolina, talks about his role in bringing a new African American history museum to Charleston.
This is a great country. It does not have to be made great again. It's a great country. Our challenge is making this country's greatness accessible and affordable for all of its citizens.
He joins a class taught by former Charleston, South Carolina Mayor Joseph Riley and Professor Kerry Taylor at the Citadel Military College. More after this.
Great honor to be with today and present today a dear friend and one of the great leaders of our country, Jim Clyburn. Congressman Clyburn is currently the majority whip, the third ranking Democrat in the United States House of Representatives, has been in the Congress since 1993 and has had a phenomenal record of achievement in economic development and racial progress, and he's one of the most revered members of the Congress. About 20 years ago, we were working to develop the idea of the International African American Museum, and Congressman Clyburn was then as busy as anyone in the Congress. If you went to his office on the Capitol Hill, it was like Grand Central Station, people coming and going and everybody needing time from the congressman and consultation with him. And I went to ask the congressman if he would consider being chair of the board of the International African American Museum that we had just created. And he was so busy, I was timid to ask. And he said, well, Joe, let me ask Emily. Emily was a congressman's dear wife who we lost sadly just a few years ago. And sign of great respect for his wife because he was busy as can be in Washington. They would get to South Carolina as often as they could. And about 2 weeks later, he called me back and he said, Joe, Emily said yes, and I will. Jim Clyburn never missed a meeting of the board of the International African American Museum. And those meetings were in Charleston. As busy as he was, not only did he not miss the meetings, but he was prepared. He had read everything that had been disseminated to the board members. He's a historian, he taught history, and he brought intellectual and historical heft to the shaping of the museum. So the museum, wonderfully under construction now, will be open in less than 2 years from now, would not have happened without Jim Clyburn. And he came to every board meeting, as I mentioned, and then he realized that he could help us get some federal money to get things going, so it would be a conflict of interest. So he stepped aside and continued to advise us, and support us. And I've known the congressman since 1970. And Congressman, one thing that I admire so many things about you, sir, is the congressman ran for the South Carolina House of Representatives in 1970. No African American had been elected to the South Carolina House of Representatives since Reconstruction. Congressman Jim ran and was narrowly defeated. In fact, we all went to bed that night knowing that Jim Clyburn would be breaking that barrier and be serving in the House of Representatives. And then as the votes were counted late and ballot boxes came in from wherever, the next morning we found that Jim had not been elected. And Congressman, your grace in accepting that so many people would have railed and something was done wrong or whatever, the way that you, sir, handled that great disappointment to you and to us who were so fervent in our desire to have you elected is something that I never forget. Do you have memories about that, Congressman? Anything you'd like to share?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to still call you Mayor. Please don't tell the current mayor that I'm doing that. But, I think I've done that in this presence as well. But thank you so much for telling that story, because there's a little more to that story that helped to firm up our relationship. During that campaign, you were running for re-election. And of course, during that time, whoever led the ticket would be designated as chair of the delegation. And Herbert Fielding and I, another African American, running together, had an uphill battle. And you felt that you would be reelected, and that we could be elected. And to help with that, I'll never forget that you gave up all the media. We had pooled our resources, divided up the radio and television. You decided that Herbert and I needed that more than you did, and you gave us all of your media time. And of course, you knew at the time that you might not lead the ticket, but you thought it was more beneficial to the state and to the Charleston community for the two of us to get elected. I've never forgotten that, and I really believe that part of what led me to be able to accept that very disappointing defeat was having experienced the way you were able to sacrifice your first place victory for Herbert and me. So thank you so much for that relationship. And so when you asked that I join this effort as chair of the steering committee, I did go to Emily, my dear wife of 58 years, because I didn't want to take on another responsibility and have her say to me at some point, you're taking on too much. And so she would not hesitate to tell me what she felt, and bringing her into that decision. And I want to thank you for the relationship that you had with Emily as well. She admired and respected you a great deal. And I really, really hope that what you're doing and what we have worked together to do will do her memory proud. So thank you so much for having me here with you.
Well, thank you. And I love Emily too. She was a most wonderful person. And she was one of those people that if you were in her company, you just felt better. Her goodness and her quality was so inspirational. Congressman, when you taught history at C.A. Brown High School way back then in the late 60s, I guess, what were the history books like? What did they teach? What did you have as material to teach you about African American history?
Not much. It was, I taught in the early 60s. I became a teacher there in Charleston in January 1962. I spent 3 years there at C.A. Brown teaching history. But what I did when I was teaching, I taught from the newspapers rather than from the textbook. Most of my fellow teachers thought back then that I was going to get fired. But I did not adhere to the let's say the folk ways of the time. But I never got fired. In fact, I had a hard time keeping people out of my classroom because I felt that history ought to be a part of the living person and to bring those students into the history. Just think, for example, I was teaching at the time that we had the Cuban crisis when the Russians placed those missiles down in Cuba. I was standing before my classroom. Why would I say to students, let's talk about the Fertile Crescent, when all they saw in the newspapers and on the videos about the Russians bringing these missiles down to Cuba not far from Charleston where they lived. And so what I did was we would pick up the newspapers, and I said, now here's what's happening today. Now let's go over to chapter 22, the chapter on Cuba, and let's talk about the background to that. That's the way I talk. It was a pretty good success. And as you know, I still hold on to relationships with many of those students, even until this day. That's the kind of thing I didn't get. When I was teaching, I was a student, the history teacher would tell us, for a test, for instance, well, we got a 10-question test here. What's the date that this happened? What's the date that Columbus discovered America? What's the date, this, that, and the other? I hated that. And so when I started teaching, on my first day in the classroom, I would tell my students, pull out your pen and paper. I want you to write down two dates. Number one, 476 AD. Number two, 1066 AD. Now, those are only 2 years I want you to remember. The year that the Roman Empire fell in 476, and William the Conqueror opened up the New World in 1066. So that, to me, were the two big dates to remember. Other than that, we talked about issues and how those issues related to them in their everyday lives.
Well, and Congressman, you provided great leadership to those young people. And I remember the ambassador from the United States, one of your students, and a couple of others that just became real distinguished leaders, and they all would point back to being in Jim Clyburn's class. The impact you had on those kids was absolutely remarkable.
Thank you. James Gadsden, who grew up there, raised by his grandparents there on Cummings Street, was in my class. And when James Gadsden was named ambassador to Iceland,
that's right.
And said, I need you to be at my swearing in. We were out of session at the time, but I came back up here to Washington to go to his swearing in. And I never shall forget that when he stepped to the podium after being sworn in, he pointed over to me. I noticed when I got there, there's a little mark on the floor that they took me to, and that's where I stood. And he pointed to me and he said to the whole crowd that I wish you all could be in one of his classes, because he opened up the world to me. America's shows. And that did everything for me. And as I was walking out of Morris Brown AME Church at Emily's homegoing service, I looked over to my right, and standing there was James Gadsden. And I didn't know that he was there when I during the service. But he told me later he would never have missed that, because he was in a little group that used to meet in our apartment. We were in an apartment there on Cummings Street, just a few blocks from him. And he and Ralph Dawson, his brother, they would all come to our house, and we would have these sessions. And I would just talk to them about the world at large, so they would know there is much more, could be much more to their lives than that which existed on Charleston's east side where Sierra Brown was. So that is, to me, was the backdrop to this great vision that you had and still hold on to with International African American Museum. Not the Charleston African American Museum or an African American Museum, but International African American Museum, because it talks about how Charleston and that community fits into the international scope of things, the kind of thing I was trying to teach Ralph and James and so many others. By the way, Ralph is now retired from a big-time attorney on Wall Street. He used to be the general counsel for American Express. That's what came out of those classes. And there were so many others I could talk about. But that's not what we're here to talk about today.
One thing, we'll get to the museum quickly, but when Congressman, when you lost the election in 1970, the newly elected governor of South Carolina, John West, who for my fellow students was a Citadel graduate, saw Jim Clyburn's character and the way that he, with grace, handled that defeat and appointed Congressman Clyburn to be the first director of the South Carolina Human Affairs Commission. And then the congressman for Governor West really went around the state and making ties and connecting business interests and other interests together that enabled South Carolina to move forward as a more racially together community. Wouldn't you say that, Congressman?
Absolutely, absolutely. John West saw that headline, reflecting upon my statement. I did not say it earlier, but when I was asked what happened in that election, I simply said, it looks like I didn't get enough votes. And when I was pressed, I held to that. It looks like I didn't get enough votes. And that was the headline on that Thursday morning. I talked to a reporter the Wednesday after the Tuesday election. On that Thursday morning, John West, having just been elected governor of South Carolina, was going out to Kill, which was nothing but a hunting ground at that time, passing through Charleston. He picked up newspapers.
That's right.
Saw the headline. And he immediately called. I was not home. He spoke with Emily. And he told Emily to please have me call him. And I called him. And he asked me to meet him that following Monday. I did. And he offered me a position on his staff. And he said to me at the time, at first I turned it down. I said, no, I don't think I need to do that. I'm a little bit too caustic. And he said to me, if I had your talent, I would be a little more caustic than you are. And so that started the relationship. And my desk in Columbia was the desk that he had as governor. His wife, Lois. When John West, when I became majority whip, she called me and she said, John West would be so proud of this. I want you to have his desk.
Wow.
He gave me the desk he had as governor. And I sit behind that desk right now every time I go to my Columbia office. And I would hope that would be somewhat of a lesson to some of your students. My dad used to tell me all the time, you never say everything that's on your mind. I'm not going to say what was on my mind on that morning after that 1970 election, but it certainly, I kept it there and I talked about the results and it made all the difference. A different headline, I don't think I would have ever gotten that call from John West, and certainly wouldn't be sitting here now as the number 3 guy among Democrats in the United States House of Representatives.
Yeah, I agree with that, Congressman. And why I raise that question for the students, because it's such important life lessons in that. And you accept disappointments with grace and you build for the future. And that's one of the many great lessons that Jim Clyburn has given us, not only as legislative leadership, but as a human being, as someone you could trust and who inspired those kids he was teaching at C.A. Brown School. And he inspires the members of Congress right now on both sides of the aisle. They look up to Jim Clyburn because of his character and his intellect and his determination. It's really amazing for us. Congressman, changing subjects a little bit, it would seem to me that the recent unfortunate efforts, in my opinion, to make it less easy for people to vote, just more cumbersome than it needs to be, that is a bit reminiscent of what happened after Reconstruction, a different form in a way. but it seems to me that it's very unfortunate that in our country that there are any efforts we respectfully believe we should make it easier and less cumbersome for American citizens to vote rather than throw these obstacles in their way. What are your thoughts about that, Congressman?
You're so right about that. I really believe that we have to be very, very careful in this great country that we have. I have said over and over again, this is a great country. It does not have to be made great again. It's a great country. Our challenge is making this country's greatness accessible and affordable for all of its citizens. And the foundation upon which that greatness is made is the unfettered right to the ballot. And we have grown in our pursuit of a more perfect union by opening up that ballot. That's what the 1964 Civil Rights Act was all about. That's what the 1965 Voting Rights Act was all about. In pursuit of perfection by making the franchise, the ballot, more accessible to all of its citizens. And for us to get to the point of backtracking on that most important thing about a democracy would be to destroy, to take us off that pursuit, and I think could very well destroy this fragile democracy that we have. We have been a shining light, as Ronald Reagan would say, on the hill for a long time. People have looked at this country, for example, for a long time. I don't know that anybody will look with honor upon any country that would turn the clock back on its pursuit of perfection, who will take away the right to vote, as some jurisdictions seem to be pursuing. I would hope that this will be an anomaly on the part of a couple of states, and let's get back in pursuit of perfection.
Well, thank you, Congressman. And I know we probably have some questions. Kerry, do we have questions ready yet?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
Open it up.
Yeah, please. And just as a reminder, for any of the students or really any of our guests, if you want to put questions into the chat, I'll do my best to relay those to the Congressman. I wanted to just maybe to take us back just for a minute, Congressman, to the 1960s. And I think about, the work that you did around the Orangeburg Massacre, and especially around the Charleston Hospital strike. And I, think about, that period as a time of such great upheaval, the assassination of Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy. And I'm wondering if you might draw some parallels or make some comparisons to our contemporary politics. And, what are the comparisons between today and 1968, if those are appropriate?
Well, sure. Well, 1968, I was long out of school at the time. I started teaching at Charleston, as I said, in 1962. I went to work for John West in 1971. In 1968, I was in Charleston at the time, but I was running the Neighborhood Youth Corps, New Careers, and in the fall of 68, I became director of the South Carolina Commission for Farm Workers. And that's where I really was at the time of the Orangeburg Massacre. Now, I knew many of the students. In fact, Ike Williams was one of the students leading that, who was from North Charleston. And Ike was on my staff as congressperson when he passed away. So what was going on then, I was very much involved with. I taught Ike how to bowl. And so he and I stayed in touch during all of that. And then I became at the time of the hospital strike in 1969, we also had a garbage worker strike. A few people fail to remember that. And Bill Saunders, who along with Mayor Moutray, was leading the hospital strike. And then when the garbage worker strike came along, for some strange reason, they asked me to get involved with the garbage workers to help negotiate an end into that. So we had two things going on simultaneously, but we met every evening to keep things on course. So the lines of communication stayed open. And that's why I'm a little bit concerned today about cutting off discussions. You have to find ways to keep the communication going. And if you stop talking, you're never going to get successfully resolve any issue. So what was going on back then, a lot of what you see today, I think is reminiscent of that. And I do believe that we overcame back then because people with open minds, some people with broad shoulders, stepped up to get us back on track and back where we needed to go. But that 1970 election came right after that hospital strike. So here is Joe Riley running for re-election, saying, I'm giving up on media. I paid for it, it's mine. But it's more important for these two people, for our legislature, to be integrated. And by the way, though I lost that election, I failed to say Herbert Phelan won. And I'm going to become the first African-American to serve on the governor's staff. And so we both came out winners. So I would say to young people all the time, these experiences you have, it may look like that obstacle is a stumbling block, but it could very well be a stepping stone if you respond appropriately to it.
Congressman, one of our wonderful librarians has a question for you. Ruby Murray asks if you might say a little bit about the political damage that the slogan "Defund the Police" did to candidates in the recent elections. And do you have any suggestions for a better framework for the urgent need for police reform moving forward?
Yes, I do. And I've been writing about it and I've been talking about it. But I think that we have to all reimagine policing. I think that, if you're a lawyer and you are policed by the Bar Association, I just saw a couple of weeks ago, two lawyers in South Carolina, maybe more. I saw the headlines about two who were disbarred because they did something wrong. So the same thing has to take place with policing. It's an honorable profession. My cousin Wilson Clyburn was almost for 40 years a police officer in Camden. I spoke at his homegoing service. I thought he was an honorable person in an honorable profession. So we cannot allow one bad apple to ruin the entire battle. And that's what will happen if you don't get that bad apple out of the process. And that's what we have to do. This whole notion that we seem to have, that once you strap on a gun or pin on a badge, all of a sudden you're a saint and you cannot be held accountable. And that's what has been allowed to creep into policing. We have to have police. It's an honorable profession to be in, and I support that. But we should not go so far as to do to the current state of affairs, like with Black Lives Matter, what happened to us back in the 1960s.
Right.
When John Lewis and I were demonstrating, helping to form what became known as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. SNCC was taken by a group of people who came out with a new slogan, "Burn, David, burn." That undercut what we were doing, undermined the effort. And I saw that along with John Lewis. Just a few months before he passed away, the two of us sat in the back of the House chamber one day, and we said that we needed to speak out. We should stand by and allow sloganeering to kill the Black Lives Matter movement the way it did the student movement that we were a part of back in the 60s. Now, I want all your students to know this. I keep talking about the student movement. You never heard me call it the civil rights movement. There has always been a civil rights movement. What was going on back in the 1960s were students, the student nonviolent movement. The NAACP was formed in 1909. So there's always been a civil rights movement. It could be the Stono Ferry or the Denmark VC insurrection of 1822. These things always take place. So I try to put things in the proper perspective. So I'm going to say to your students, let's keep things in the proper perspective. And one of them is keep policing in the proper perspective. And let's remember that throwing out a bad policeman is not to destroy the profession.
Our good student and the president of the campus chapter of the Young Democrats, and he's active in the Young Democrats statewide, Tyler Mitchell, would like to ask you that, given all the events of the previous year, what are the prospects that America can build a stronger foundation in the area of social equality?
I think the prospects are great that it could be done. My dad used to say something to me all the time that I think about a lot these days. Where there is a will, there is a way. What we have to do is develop the will. And I don't think enough people have developed the will to do what's necessary. It's so easy to walk away from it. It's easy to pretend it is not going on. The hard part is working together and putting aside individual differences. The mayor and I have been talking about my late wife here today, and I say to people a lot, I was born and raised in the town of Sumter. I went to South Carolina State, and I met Emily on that campus. Now, she was born and raised up in Moncks Corner on a little 22-acre farm. And we found out very early in our marriage that our backgrounds were so different that we had to make some significant adjustments in order to have a successful marriage. And I think the same thing applies to almost everything that we do. We have to learn that we have different backgrounds, different experiences, and we have to learn from each other. And you don't necessarily learn from people by shutting them up. You learn from them by listening to them. You get an atmosphere for solving problems by coming together. And so I would say the prospects are great if we can keep people engaged on a very personal level. And that's the challenge. For me to be able to set aside whatever my inclinations might be long enough to listen to the other guy to see whether or not he's got a better idea. And the same thing applies to women as well. I happen to be the father of 3 daughters. I listen to them. I talk to them. I ask their advice. And I often follow it.
As I've been standing here, I literally keep getting goosebumps. And I mean it. And it's just so thrilling to see this fine, wise man representing our country in the Congress, representing us in South Carolina, but truth and justice, knowledge, experience. It's we often read about things in political life that displease us, and it's so important that we rejoice when we see someone like Jim Clyburn, who's essentially devoted his life to this cause. And it's about honesty and injustice and integrity and service. So for everyone who tuned in today, and certainly for the students of the class I'm honored to teach here, Congressman, we just thank you so much for being with us and the marvelous example you give all of us of public service, decency, and what it means to be a citizen of our country. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I would commend to all of your students, if you have not done so already, please do me a big favor. Read Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from the Birmingham City Jail. That, to me, next to the Bible, is one of the most timeless documents I've ever read. And I want to call your attention to one little part of that book. King wrote in that book that we are going to be made to repent in this generation, not just for the vitriolic words and deeds of bad people, but for the appalling silence of good people. And so the good people, when we see injustice, must break our silence. We have to do what's necessary to preserve this country. We have been an example for the world, and we cannot allow any misfits to destroy that mantra that we have developed over the years, being that shining light on the hill. So thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, for allowing me to be here with you today. And tell Tecklenburg that I'm not disrespecting him when I call you.
Well, thank you, sir. And if I could just add one thing on the for the students, Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail. He was in jail. He wasn't given any paper to write on, so he wrote that most amazing letter on the margins and the edges of newspapers that he was collecting. It just the message is so powerful, but the knowledge of what that courageous, industrious man did to make sure that the truth get out. It's really wonderful. Thank you very much, Congressman Clyburn.
Thank you, brother.
Thank all of you for being here today.
Thanks for listening to C-SPAN's Lectures in History podcast. C-SPAN has a new podcast, Presidential Recordings. Season 1 looks at the presidency of Lyndon Johnson through his secretly recorded phone calls. Find it wherever you listen to podcasts.